So I think maybe we can get started. My name's Jen Moore, an associate fellow with the Institute for Policy Studies. And just first, I want to hand things over to our interpreter team from the Tilde Cooperative to give us some guidance on making best use of the interpretation during the webinar today.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone. My name is Karin, and I'm here with my colleague Mara, and we will provide simultaneous interpretation in English and Spanish, and we will use the Zoom interpretation features. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Karin y estoy con mi colega Mara. Estaremos interpretando de manera simultánea entre el inglés y el español y vamos a utilizar la función de interpretación de Zoom. If you're not bilingual, please join one of the interpretation channels. Si no es bilingüe, le sugerimos se una a un canal de interpretación. To hear interpreting into English, please select the channel for English by clicking on the globe icon that says interpretation at the bottom of your screen and then select English. If you don't see the globe, click on more or the three dots, then language interpretation, then English, and then done. Para escuchar la interpretación al español, por favor selecciona el canal para español haciendo clic en el icono con el globo de interpretación en la parte de abajo de su pantalla y luego seleccione español. Si no ve el globo, haga clic en más o los tres puntos, luego interpretación de idiomas, luego español y por último finalizado. Thank you so much. Back to you, Jen.
Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you so much, Karen and Mara, for joining us and making this multilingual space possible today. And also a big thanks to our tech support today, to Netfa and Aldo, who are holding down the fort. And to everybody who's joining us. We really appreciate your presence today. And thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat. I hope you'll continue to do that. Really pleased to see everybody who's joined us, and also just invite you throughout the webinar to put any questions or comments you might have into the Q&A box. We're going to have considerable time after our guests share their first round of comments for some good questions and answers. So maybe just to get started, and before we hear from our guests, I just want to share a few reflections about the report, The Dark Side of the Energy Transition, Green Colonialism in Honduras, that we're sharing today. And the reason that we felt it was very important to hold this set of back-to-back webinars, yesterday and now today. As my colleague Felicia Guillen commented at the start of our first conversation last night, the green colonialism that we observe in southern Honduras is very much part of the highly problematic way that the so-called energy transition is taking place today on a global scale. We have yet to truly enter into a process of transition, and the global north and corporate-driven formulations that continue maximizing private profits are reproducing the same colonial, patriarchal, capitalist, and imperial patterns that we already know too well and that are on full display in the world today. In southern Honduras, privatized renewable energy generation imposed through a slew of solar parks was set up to maximize the profits of transnational investors and elite investors at the expense of the Honduran poor majority and directly affected communities who bear the brunt of the impacts. It was not based on any thought to really substituting fossil fuels or identifying and addressing community energy needs, but rather on taking advantage of the global climate crisis to create a new market to benefit the cronies of the narco-dictatorship of a convicted criminal, past President Juan Orlando Hernandez, and a group of transnational investors. Not only were the solar energy projects approved in a context of deepening privatization, rampant corruption, and links to organized crime, but also one of terrible repression. The implications of this very much continue to be felt by the land and environment defenders who have been peacefully resisting the Los Prados solar project, owned by Norwegian investors Scatec, Norfund, and KLP Norfund Investments. We're going to hear a lot more about that today. We also see the deep asymmetries at play between the power of transnational investors and grassroots communities. This is particularly striking when we see that the complaints over corruption and irregularities in the approval of these projects, and that were filed by the local communities and their allies, the Southern Environmentalist Social Movement for Life, and the network of women human rights defense lawyers, do not advance. In contrast, a group of energy sector investors readily sued the government of Honduras under the recent administration for over $1 billion when modest reforms were passed to attend to only the worst excesses in their existing contracts. To better understand the ramifications of all of this, a year ago, we gathered together as organizations involved in this collaboration with about 20 communities from across southern Honduras. At that time, we were challenging the then administration's idea of energy sovereignty, arguing that there cannot be sovereignty or a just energy transition without respect for human rights. In the words of our joint statement, we said, energy sovereignty requires more than a change in energy sources. It demands the democratization of energy decisions and the development of a model of energy generation and distribution based on economic equality and guarantee of the economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights of communities. Since then, the political context in Honduras has gotten considerably worse, which is very much a reflection of the grotesque display of US imperialism at large, and that we'll try to get into as part of our conversation today. But I just wanted to conclude these opening remarks by saying that we are launching this new report now in the hope of building new bridges with organizations in Norway, in Europe, and North America to strengthen solidarity against the ongoing criminalization, impunity, and lack of respect for community self-determination, and for a different vision of development in Honduras. And we recognize the need to make these connections with a lot of understanding and creativity in these difficult times for organizing. With that, I would like to turn now to our guests who are joining us from Choluteca, Honduras this morning. Well, morning in Honduras, afternoon in Europe and Norway, and we're really happy to be bridging those time zones. And we want to get started by hearing from our guests from this Southern environmentalist social movement for life, Más Vida, by their initials in Spanish. And we're going to invite Doña Fidelina Perez, the general coordinator of Más Vida, and Germán Chirinos, the technical director of Más Vida, to provide some opening comments to try to situate us in southern Honduras, to understand the nature of social and environmental struggle in southern Honduras, and especially why this became such an attractive environment for large-scale solar projects starting about just over 10 years ago. So first, I'd like to hand things over to Doña Fidelina Perez, if you can provide us with some opening reflections about the work of Más Vida and the nature of social and environmental struggle in southern Honduras before we hear from Germán. Doña Fidelina, por favor.
Buen día. Sí, soy Fidelina
Hello,
Pérez,
my name is
coordinadora del
Fidelina
movimiento
Perez.
ambientalista
I'm
social del Por la Vida, Más Vida.
Por la Vida Más Vida.
Decirles que el
To
movimiento
say
ambientalista
that
social del
this
sur cuenta con
movement
una
counts
estructura de
with a structure
43
of
organizaciones más,
43
todas en el
organizations
mismo
that
quehacer,
are
en la
doing
defensa
similar stuff. That's
de la
defending
naturaleza, defensa del
nature,
medio ambiente, el
defending
agua y defensa de la vida.
water, and
El
defending
sur
life.
es una
The
zona muy
South
rica.
is very rich here in Honduras.
Puedo decir rica porque
I
sus
can say
tierras son muy
rich because
productivas.
it's very
De
productive. The
igual
earth is very
manera,
productive.
contamos con
And we count
muchos
with
yacimientos de oro
uh,
y metales preciosos.
minerals like gold,
Los
and that makes
inversionistas
it that
estén interesados en
that
querer
people are
tener
interested in
propiedad
uh,
en ese
obtaining the
ambiente.
property of
Es
this
ahí
richness,
donde
and that's
nosotros
where
estamos
we
siempre
are
cuidando
always taking
porque
care,
sabemos
because we
el daño que
know that
ocasiona
the
la
damage that
minería
causes with the mining.
al extraer el mineral,
When you extract the
el
mineral,
agua se
the
nos
water
escasea.
is
Y esa es la
becomes
crisis que
less,
vivimos en
and
esta
that's the
zona.
crisis that
La
we're
falta de
facing in
agua,
this
la
area.
falta de
Less water, no
mano,
water.
falta de tierras para el
The
campesino, porque
earth
en su
for the
mayoría las
people who
tierras
are
las han
working them.
acaparado los grandes
The big
inversionistas. Y
investors are taking over all
es
the
una lucha constante.
hectares,
El
and it's just a
campesino siempre
continuous
está
fight.
luchando por
We are always fighting
defender lo
to
poco que le queda,
defend the little that we have left,
defender la naturaleza.
defend the nature.
Es muy atractivo.
It is very
Como les decía en un
attractive,
principio, pues la
like I
zona
said
es
in the
bastante
beginning,
rica,
that it's, you know,
mas
it's
sin
a very
embargo,
rich area, but
hace falta
there's a need.
bastante
There's a
conciencia
need
social
of
para poder
social
estar siempre en la
consciousness,
defensa.
and
Esta
we are
situación
always
que
defending,
también nos
and the
lleva a grandes
situation
riesgos,
always causes
porque
high
cuando
risk,
nosotros
because
estamos
when we
defendiendo un
are
territorio,
defending a
también
territory,
exponemos la vida.
we also expose our life
Cuando
ourselves.
el poder económico
When the
se
economic
antepone
power
a la
is put
necesidad
in front
del
of the
ciudadano.
people, the people of the
Hay
country,
esta zona, a
this
pesar de ser
area,
tierras fértiles
even though
y
it's
ser
very fertile
tierras con mucho
and
mineral,
it has
también
a lot of
pasamos
minerals,
grandes sequías.
we have a lot
He
of dry
llamado a esta zona
periods.
como el corredor
It's
seco,
called the
en
dry
donde
corridor.
nos encontramos la escasez de
And
agua, la
we
crisis de
find
agua, la
uh,
relacionamos
the
nosotros
terrible
también
situation with
con
the water.
la perforación de
And
pozos.
we do
Tenemos
have,
ahí empresas
they
dedicadas
they take the water
a la agricultura, como es la
for
ocra, el
the
melón, la
okra,
sandía,
melon,
para poder ellos
watermelon,
tener
and to be
una
able
buena cosecha.
to be able to get a
También
good
perforan
harvest.
grandes pozos
They
y eso
take a lot of
hace
the
que el
water
agua
and it goes
se profundice y
under
ahí es
the
donde nos
soil,
encontramos las crisis
and
con la
that's where we
falta de
find a
agua
lot
para
of
nuestra
crisis, because we
gente.
don't have enough
Así
water for our
que
people.
el quehacer continúa.
So
Tenemos mucho por hacer en este país.
we have a lot to do, a lot to work for in this country,
nos vemos amenazados.
because we find
En el gobierno
ourselves
anterior
with the
se
government.
hizo podríamos decir un stop a la minería, pero
The government kind of
recientemente
did a
nos
stop
hemos
to the
dado
mining,
cuenta que han
but we
surgido
have
nuevos
found
permisos de explotación
that there are a
minera,
lot of
a la cual
permissions now
la
that are
zona sur se
granted.
opone.
In the
De
south,
hecho, tenemos ya
there's
varios
opposition,
municipios
so we have to
que han
call
sido
various
declarados libres de minería. Mas,
areas
sin
that are
embargo,
free
nos damos
of
cuenta
mining, but we do
que
notice
hay camiones
that there are
trayendo
buses
el
bringing
material, lo
materials
que comúnmente se le
that
llama la
it's
brosa,
usually
para
called la brosa,
lavar,
to
montar
wash
oro. Y
the
eso
gold,
nos viene a
and this
contaminar
is
tanto el medio
contaminating
ambiente
the
que
our
nos
earth, our
encontramos en una
area, that we
situación,
find ourselves in a
podríamos decir, de
situation
riesgo y muy
that we
difícil.
find,
Gracias.
it's very hard, and it's kind of a threat. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, doña Fidelina.
Thank you, Doña Fidelina.
It's very important to have this context. There are
Very
many
important to have this.
threats that affect the region of southern Honduras and around which Más Vida and affected communities are organizing. I'd really like to pass the things over to Germán Chirinos, technical director now for Más Vida, to talk a bit more about how these solar parks were imposed in southern Honduras and why it became such an attractive area for these investments. And if you can talk a little bit about the context in which that happened, Germán. Adelante.
Buenos días.
Hello.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Germán Chirinos. I'm in Más Vida. I wanted to mention that the famous South in 2014, it's when everything starts with all these projects. They start working with bringing work to the South. When we talk about the idea of having three parks, which is the generation of jobs, and it was a cheaper energy. In that sense, a lot of the communities, when they when they felt the necessity of work, there was an opposition to it. These projects, these projects between the departments and the governments did not present in 2014. That's when it starts. That's when the first park is created in Nacaoa, and that project did not have any resistance from the communities. But when the time goes on, we realize that, even though they did give us jobs, these projects give you work during the time of the construction. So it's around 6 months. Now that that $30,000 that are created, that were invested in this project, is what we think or what we know. In 3 years, it took the whole, so they were able to get their money back in 3 years, and now the work that is offered is only for security police. There's not really a generation of work at this time right now, and it's we are paying the energy. It's quite expensive. It's not cheap, and it damages the society, these parks, because you stop society to have better access to a better system of health, or doctors, and because these projects get all the money. The state and the fiscal sponsors lose 43,000 a year, and that investment is incredibly big, and it could help the medical services, the education in Honduras. But these projects are limiting our possibilities to become a better society or help the society. These projects in Los Prados with Norway was generated with an opposition by the organizations here in the communities in Masigüe. And we as Más Vida were accompanying, and we were helped by the defenders of humanity to be able to accompany all the violations of human rights projects, and these jobs or these projects are growing. I wanted to let you know that the state was like a human right, and we really question, what does it mean that energy is a human right? But there are communities in 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers away that don't even have the service of electricity. So to declare a positive thing about a human resistance, but then you do not give it to the humans that are around, and this whole investment that is so big, it's so great and huge, is not responding to the needs of the population in Honduras. It's a model that is for the agro-industrial systems, but it's not for humans. The humans are left as the last people. or the people who are not being taken account for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Herman, for that important introduction, especially to the false promises that were used to promote these projects originally, and what has really been the outcome for the south of Honduras. We'd like to hear now a bit more. You made reference to the resistance that rose up against the Norwegian-owned project Los Prados. And we have with us Don Leonardo Amador, who is a community leader from Los Prados Uno, the community of Los Prados One, who's been very active since the start of the resistance to the Los Prados solar energy project. He's been criminalized, he's been threatened for his role in the peaceful resistance. And due to this, the company was not able to build the solar parks at the north end of the project where Los Prados 1 is located in the municipality of Namasigüe. So, Don Leonardo, could you share with us how the resistance to Los Prados started and why the communities that you're part of have been organizing against this project? What were your concerns? What were the things that really upset you and led to this really enormous undertaking on the part of the communities? Están en silencio ahí en el salón. Si se puede prender el micrófono, por favor.
Con la mente puesta en defensa
we were, defending our territory. And like you say, we were doing this to create consciousness to the people about our community, with, inviting people to participate in the defense against these projects. Our communities, there are a lot of people that, but with the organizations that have been guiding us, have been realizing that we have to defend. And so we become, we start telling other people, we're always active. And we're there we're an encampment of resistance. We always see that we're kind of we have an objective of defending, because if we don't do it as adults and we actually know what situation is happening, the younger people cannot see further away. We have been seen to defend our communities. A lot of people of the community has been interested in this for personal benefits, to get some type of money. They could get some money, and the people in power were giving 3,000 per person, so people were becoming to be very happy because there were 5 or 6 in one family, so they would get quite a lot of stuff. So 18,000, that money was good for that family. And if you got some cement, and if they give you 10 bags of cement for each person, then also that was really good. But the saddest part about this community is that there were some families that were involved in that sad devastation. They took the cement, and then they were selling the cement. They were not even using it for their own house. It was like they would get it and sell it afterwards. And the same thing happened with other things that they were using for the ceilings or for other parts of the house. And that was the biggest problem. We had people that were against or in favor for the projects.
débil de la mente, le puedo decir,
trying to
donde los
buy
engañaban
people,
fácilmente a hacerlos que firmaran un documento,
and
que
they would make
prestaran su
people
número de
sign
identidad
a
para
document, show the
llevárnoslo
ID,
a las
so
oficinas
they could send it to the offices,
de estas fotovoltaicas, y de esa manera
and this way
la lucha se estaba debilitando.
the people were
Como
diluting off,
decimos,
dividing themselves,
éramos más,
and
entonces
finally the
al
good
final
people
pues
were
pudimos
more, and we were
detener el
able to
proyecto.
stop the
Hasta
project.
este momento,
Until
ahorita Los
that
Prados lo
time,
tenemos parado la
we
mayor
were,
parte,
we
pero
stopped it. The
nos
majority of it,
llenamos de
it's been stopped,
preocupación
but
porque
we're kind of full of worry because
ayer les comentaba de que
yesterday I
los
was
actores que
saying that the
aprobaron estos
actors
proyectos,
that approved
muchos
this
están hoy
project
gobernándolos
are
otra vez
now are governing
y
again,
por lo que estamos mirando,
and we're seeing
aprobando leyes
that
siempre en contra
they're
del
approving
pueblo
laws that are against
y
the
favoreciendo
people and
al empresario,
favoring
al que tiene el
the
poder.
the
Y claro,
companies who have the
ellos
power,
piensan que
and they
un
think
pueblo
that
sumiso en
sleeping
necesidades y
people
con
that need
políticos reconocidos,
stuff
los, los políticos como Juan Obispo,
and
como Tomás Zambrano,
like Tomás
como las
Zambrano,
consejeras José López y Ana
like the
Paola Gómez,
consejera
que
Lopez,
al pueblo hay que aplastarlo
that they
y
should
que
squash people
en nuestro país.
in our
Entonces,
country.
es muy
So
preocupante
it's very
el ver,
worrisome
estar
to
viviendo estas
have
situaciones
this situation,
y nosotros como
and
criminalizados
we
estamos siendo
become
protegidos por estas
criminalized.
personas. Entonces es muy preocupante.
So it is
Gracias.
quite worrisome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Don Leonardo. Um, and we're going to hear a little bit more now from another leader in the community resistance, but from the southern end of the Los Prados project. Doña Marlene Pastrana is a community leader from the community of Costa Azul, one of the communities that's closest to the operating solar parks that form part of Los Prados. She and pretty much her whole family have been intensely targeted in Scatec's campaign of criminalization against the peaceful resistance to the Los Prados project. She's one of 10 land and environment defenders who, for over 8 years, have been signing into court now every month for their peaceful resistance. Marlene, can you talk a bit about the impacts of the criminalization that you and your family have faced, especially as a woman environment defender, and also talk about some of the impacts that you felt in Costa Azul from since the solar parks have been installed so close by?
Buenos días o buenas tardes.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Los impactos que nosotros hemos recibido como
The impact
comunitario han
that
sido la
our
criminalización que
community
los
has
ha
felt
impactado mucho en la
has
familia,
been the criminalization,
donde
which has
mi
impacted our
familia
families. My
están
family
demandados, mis papás,
has been
unos señores
criminalized. My parents
que ya son adultos mayores, que mi papá tiene
have been
75 años y
criminalized.
mi mamá
They're
tiene
elderly
73.
people, 75,
Y
73
además de
years
eso,
old.
demandaron casi todos mis hermanos.
Also, almost
Y eso ha
all of my
sido más
siblings
el impacto que nosotros hemos
were
recibido
sued, and
cuando
that has
también mi
been
papá
a big impact for us.
casi fue
That has
detenido,
affected a
digamos,
lot
cuando estaba en una
our family.
audiencia.
And my
Y fue así como la
father
red
was almost detained
no
while
sé
he
cómo
was in a
hicieron
hearing,
para sacarlo a mi papá de la
and
audiencia. Y lo
the
trasladaron a otro
network
lugar para que él no quedara preso un
advocated
día.
so that
Y
he
así ha venido
was
impactando a la familia.
transported to another
Luego,
place,
después
and
de eso,
they
también
avoided
nosotros
detention for him, or him to
fuimos
be detained.
detenidos también,
We were also
que
detained.
los llegaron con un citatorio, engañados,
We got
diciendo que
received
íbamos a
a
servir
warning. It
de,
was misleading because
ellos
it
dijeron que
said
éramos
that
testigos protegidos.
we were protected
Y pues ya
witnesses.
luego que cuando nosotros los presentamos, ya no
But when
éramos que
we
veníamos
showed
a eso,
up,
no que era
they told
detenido que
us
estábamos.
that it
varios
was to detain
comunitarios.
us.
Sin
Many
embargo,
of
había una
our
compañera
community
que
members
también estaba recién criando, ella andaba
this
su bebé
also
y pues
involved
así las
a
organizaciones pudieron, porque le querían quitar el niño
community
también,
member
las
who
organizaciones
was
se hicieron
just
cargo en ese momento del
who had
niño, lo sacaron de
um,
allí, lo andaban
a
ellos
young child,
afuera,
and they took
mientras
the
nosotros
child
estábamos detenidos allí.
and
Mi
protected
papá
him
estuvo detenido esa vez, me
um,
acuerdo, mi
while she
hermano,
was
mi
detained.
mamá, yo y una
That was a
compañera
network.
que se
And
llamaba Jenny,
I was
que
detained, my
por
father,
motivos
my
de
brother,
pues,
a
preocupaciones
colleague, or a
también
community
tuvieron
member.
que
We
salir
were
del
all
país
detained.
con toda su familia.
Some
Y sin
of the
embargo, un
community
hermano
members
mío
had to leave
también, dos
the
hermanos míos
country
también tuvieron que salir del país, o sea
because
que hemos tenido
they were
demasiados
afraid for
impactos
their families.
con la
When some of my
criminalización por el
brothers
miedo que
too
hemos
had to
tenido,
leave
miedo de fracasar, digamos,
because we
porque no es
were
tan fácil
afraid of
morir uno en la
criminalization.
lucha. Y pues
Also, we were
la familia
afraid
se tuvo
of
que
being
desplazar
killed
a otro
as
país
part of this struggle.
y es así
So
como
some
nosotros hemos
part of the
estado,
family had to
digamos,
be
psicológicamente,
displaced,
hemos estado enfermos.
um, had to leave the
También
country.
estas cosas han
We
tenido muchas
have
consecuencias de enfermedades porque a veces
also
ahora las personas estamos padeciendo de
gotten sick.
preocupaciones, se los ha
We had been
acelerado, digamos, la
under so
presión, el
much
azúcar
worry,
a varios
stress. We had
ancianos
a
ya que
lot of
ya
high
están
blood
con muchos años,
pressure,
ya ellos ya
high
no aguantan
sugar
tanto la presión.
levels,
Esto
and
ahorita como está de caliente,
we have many
pues, y
elderly people
decirles
who are
que
sick
también
now,
pues nosotros hemos
and it's very hard in here now.
afrontado la deforestación, porque la
We have
deforestación es la que nos ha
experienced
dado, da
deforestation.
vida, digamos, porque es donde respiramos el aire,
The
son los
trees give
árboles.
us life because that
Entonces,
they
yo
provide
creo
the
que
air we
nosotros
breathe.
ecológicamente
And I
sí
think
hemos
we
tenido
have suffered
demasiado,
psychologically.
a pesar que hemos tenido el apoyo con psicólogos
We
también
have
por parte de
had
las
support
organizaciones,
from
pero
psychologists provided
como
by
dice,
the
hemos
organizations,
avanzado un poco
but
porque la
we
verdad que
have
yo antes no me
felt this
sentía bien,
effect,
ahora me
and
siento capaz,
we're
soy
improving.
otra persona
I feel like I feel better now.
con las
I feel
luchas que
like
hemos
I'm a
tenido
different
y hemos
person.
aprendido pues que hay que
We
defender
have
nuestros
learned
bienes comunes,
so
el
much
agua,
about
principalmente el
defending
agua que
our
está
public
contaminada
goods,
porque esos paneles
especially the
ahorita en
water,
el verano los lavan
which is
y esas aguas van a
contaminated
dar
now, is
a,
polluted. These
digamos, a
panels,
una playa donde
they
la gente
wash
también se
them,
alimenta de esos porque sacan
and
camarones
this is at the
etiquetados.
beach
Entonces ellos
where
están
people
consumiendo
go fishing for
contaminaciones en
fish
los
or
alimentos
shellfish,
y
and
digamos
people
por las
are
producciones de
consuming these
las
contaminants,
tierras ya
these
no están
pollutants in
produciendo lo
their
mismo
food.
como antes, porque
Also,
antes mi
the
papá
land is
sembraba
not
y no
producing as
tenía esa
much as
sequedad.
before.
Ahora pues él está
Before, when my
luchando porque
parents
tiene una su
grew
siembra ahí de
food,
unos
plants in
sus
their
frijoles y un
crops,
sumay, pero él lo
it
está
was very
regando
productive.
con
Now
mucho
it's so
sacrificio, él lo
dry,
está sacando
and
adelante y es preocupante pues
there's a lot of
decir
sacrifice
que
to
nosotros
and work to do to water these crops now because of the
hemos
drought.
tenido muchas dificultades.
We have had
Muchas
many
gracias.
difficulties. Thank you so much.
Me pasó la suya.
Thank you so much, Marlene. And I just want to remind everyone who's joined us, if you have any questions during these interventions, please do put them into the Q&A. We will have time to take your questions after we have this round of comments. Next, I want to invite lawyer Samantha Lindo. Samantha is part of the network of women human rights defense lawyers, which together with Mas Vida have been accompanying the 10 land and environment defenders who continue to be criminalized by the Norwegian company Scatec. They also work together to bring 33 claims in 2020 against public officials over abuse of authority and fraud in the approval of the solar energy contracts with the Special Office of Investigation Against Corruption Networks, UFERCO. These claims have yet to advance. Samantha, could you share your insights into the judicial process related to how Scatec has been criminalizing environment defenders like Don Leonardo y Doña Marlene, who've been peaceful resisting the Los Prados project? And could you talk a bit about the irregularities that you've found with regard to the way the contracts and permits for the Los Prados project were approved?
Gracias. Qué gusto que podamos articular estos
Thank you
espacios. Soy miembro de la red de
for this
abogadas defensoras
space.
de
I'm a
derechos
member
humanos,
of
un
the
equipo
network of
interdisciplinario integrado por
defense
mujeres,
attorneys
abogadas,
for
psicólogas,
human rights.
mercadólogas,
Is a
entre
team
otras
of women
disciplinas que nos permiten
psychologists,
poder realizar
attorneys,
acciones
and
de
other
litigio
professions
estratégico a favor
that
de las
allow us to
comunidades en el
do
sur de
these
Honduras.
litigations
De
to
esta
defend these
manera es como
communities
nos
in the south
permitió
of
acompañar
Honduras.
desde el principio
We
lo
have
que es la
accompanied them
causa Prados. De esta manera hemos
from the
podido
beginning
documentar
against
esas
this
violaciones
Prados
sistemáticas de derechos
project. We
humanos,
have been able
también lo que
to
es el acceso a la
document
justicia, la
uh,
criminalización en contra de
and defend them
defensores,
against
la
these
corrupción
violations
para
of
la
human
instalación de
rights.
estos proyectos
And we have
fotovoltaicos,
highlighted the
el uso
corruption
abusivo del sistema
to
penal y lo que ahora más
install
nos preocupa
these
es
solar
cómo los
parks.
inversionistas
We are
están
worried now
utilizando el arbitraje
how
internacional
the
como
investors
mecanismo de
are
presión
using
en
the
contra de las
international
comunidades.
arbitrage
Como
as
ya
a
compartían los
mechanism to
liderazgos de
pressure
cada una de las
the local
comunidades, la causa
communities.
Prado se ha visto afectada.
The
Más de 5
Prado
comunidades por la
cause
instalación
has been
fraudulenta e inconsulta
affecting
de un proyecto
5
fotovoltaico.
communities for the
Las acciones
fraudulent
comenzaron en el año
project
2016 cuando las
of
comunidades
solar
empezaron a
project.
resistir haciendo el uso legítimo
96
de su
communities
derecho a la
started
protesta pacífica
resist
en contra de un proyecto que no
this
tenían
project
conocimiento. Mas, sin
peacefully.
embargo,
They did not know
observaban
much about
cómo en
this
sus
project,
comunidades
but
talaban
they
árboles, aplanaban sus
observed,
fuentes de agua
experienced
y
how their
destruían sin
communities
tener conocimiento qué era lo que estaba pasando.
were experiencing
A raíz de
deforestation,
esa
drought.
manifestación pacífica que estaban
Because of
haciendo las
that peaceful
comunidades,
protest,
las
these
empresas
communities
Scatec Solar y
uh,
Norfund de
were
origen
attacked
noruego
by these
presentaron 3
companies from
requerimientos fiscales,
Norway.
utilizando de manera desmedida el uso
They
del derecho penal
used
bajo los delitos de
criminalization
coacciones y amenazas.
such
Requerimientos
as
fiscales con el objetivo de
coercion
debilitar
and
la
threats.
lucha que estaban realizando las
They
comunidades,
wanted to
además de
witness
generar un
the
gasto económico, como
protests
ya lo
of these
mencionaban los líderes.
communities.
Esto ha traído un desgaste
This
emocional,
has been
físico, psicológico, un
impoverishing for the
señalamiento,
communities,
una
but also has
estigmatización,
been a
señalamiento y
stress.
división, estrategia que han estado utilizando los
And these
inversionistas a través
attacks
de los empleados.
have been a strategy of
Uso
these
abusivo por parte del Estado a través de la
investors.
criminalización ha sido en
This
contra
is
de
an
mujeres,
abuse
personas
to
de
the
la tercera y
communities
cuarta edad,
against
también
women,
personas con
elderly people,
discapacidad, personas
people
también
with
mujeres que estaban en
disabilities,
estado de gestación.
women who were
Contra esos
pregnant,
líderes y liderazgos es que el Estado ha
and
estado
the state
reprimiendo a
was
través de la
suppressing these
criminalización. Es
leaders through
importante mencionar
criminalization.
que como
It's
organización hemos
important to mention
realizado
that
una
as an
documentación e
organization,
investigación
we have
sobre las
documented this
irregularidades
investigation
de estos
on
proyectos.
the
¿Por qué?
irregularities
¿Por
of
qué
this
están
project.
criminalizando a los defensores?
Why
¿Por qué se
are
están
they
levantando
criminalizing,
en contra
penalizing
de este
the
proyecto
defenders
fraudulento? Para
who are
iniciar,
resisting this
este proyecto
fraudulent project?
fotovoltaico fue aprobado por el Congreso Nacional
This
cuando no
project, solar
estaban
project, was
autorizados a
approved by
legislar. En
Congress when
enero
they
del
were
2014
not
se
authorized
aprobaron
to do
67
that.
decretos y 100
In
proyectos de energía
2014,
fotovoltaica,
77
los
decrees
cuales se
approved
realizaron mediante
all these solar projects.
licenciamientos, express,
They were done
haciendo el
through
uso desproporcionado también de
expedited
los
licensing,
procesos
and they
administrativos,
were abusing the
faltando a legalidades, lo cual
administrative
esto también se
projects or
resume en
processes, and these
corrupción,
were irregularities.
en
There
otorgación
was
de
corruption.
concesiones ilegales,
They were
ya que
conceiving
las empresas
these
se crearon
illegally.
de maletín de manera individual, son los
The
mismos dueños, los
companies were
mismos
treated
accionistas,
as
como les
different small
mencionaba, son
companies,
empresas
but
de
they were
origen
all
noruego. Se
one
crearon 9 empresas,
investor
realmente
from
operan como una sola,
Norway.
pero sus licenciamientos
They created 9
los
different
solicitaron de
small
manera
companies, but
individual
they
para no
were
poder,
one
no dar a
company.
conocer el impacto, el
They
verdadero
apply
impacto
for the
ambiental que
license
tenía esto en las
as
comunidades,
small
porque
individual companies
los proyectos están colocados
when
en el
they
centro
were one
de las
company.
comunidades, teniendo un impacto de categoría 4,
This
cuando
was a
realmente de
level
manera
4
individual
impact because the
están
projects
por
were
una categoría
within the
2. Los
community.
proyectos
But
operan
when
como
they
uno solo en la
apply, they
práctica.
were
Es por eso que les
qualified as
denominamos el
level 2
megaproyecto fotovoltaico
as
Los Prados.
individual
Es importante también mencionar
companies. This is
que
why we
además de la
call them
categorización
Los Prados solar project. Also, we observed fraudulent fraud in the process. They didn't have, these companies didn't have the experience to operate here in Honduras, which was part of the requirements. They did not involve the community. They did not get the input from the community, and that's also worrisome. This pressure against the communities have produced criminalization or penalization of these leaders, and they can access this international arbitrage or mechanism, but the defenders have been fighting for 8 years and they haven't had any movement or advance. This means the defenders, the advocates, have been 8 years fighting for this without any recognition and being attacked and pressured. This community doesn't have any human rights and there's no transparency.
Thank you so much, Samantha. And just to comment, the map that Aldo was putting up while Samantha was speaking shows the 9 projects that together make up the Los Prados project, and that in this very fragmented way obtained contracts and permits in order to get sort of slide under the radar and not have to go through a serious environmental evaluation amongst the other irregularities that she's very clearly outlined, and that were largely granted to cronies of the government of Juan Orlando Hernandez in 2014, and then bought up a year later by Norwegian investors in this case. And to try to put some of these different pieces together, I want to pass things over to Karen Spring now. Karen Spring is the co-coordinator of the Honduras Solidarity Network, based in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, since the time of the 2009 military-backed coup, and is also a co-author of the report that we've just published, The Dark Side of the Energy Transition, Green Colonialism in Southern Honduras. Karen, can you help us pull together some of the connections that we've been hearing about so far between the corrupt and criminal networks involved in the approval of these projects, with the international financial institutions behind also pushing for privatization in the energy sector, as well as transnational investors benefiting from all of this? How have some of these same investors fought to bully Honduras to keep in place the exorbitant incentives for their business? And what are some of the things that you'd like to see to change? All that in 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm going to provide a bit of context about the investment climate in Honduras surrounding what the report calls green colonialism, that's being promoted and expanded by these large-scale energy projects or solar energy projects in southern Honduras, as well as the investor-state dispute, or the ISDS claims, totaling over $1.2 billion in the energy sector alone against the state of Honduras. So to start, Norfund, which is a supposed development bank, Scatec and KLP Norfund Investments, that are the 3 Norwegian companies, like other companies from the US, Canada, and regional Central American elite, invested in Honduras in a period known as the narco-dictatorship. And why do we call it that? Well, after the 2009 military coup, ex-President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who we've heard about today, who later became a convicted drug trafficker sentenced to 45 years in prison in the US, and his national party consolidated power, leading to widespread, deepening corruption and the infiltration of organized crime across all government institutions. In 2014, the National Congress that was led by Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was president of Congress, a few days before he was set to leave that position and become the president of Honduras, approved a series of solar and renewable energy generation contracts in an illegal congressional session in the early hours of the morning, granting various financial incentives to attract investors from many companies in the name of the energy transition. Now, most of the contracts approved in that illegal session are owned by companies that now form part of the seven ISDS claims that at one point totaled over $1.6 billion, as I already mentioned, against the state of Honduras. And besides the Norwegian companies, there's also a Canadian company named Brookfield with ties to the current Canadian Prime Minister. They've also filed energy-related claims against Honduras. Now, most of the claims against Honduras, actually all of them, were presented after the Xiomara Castro administration, who was governing from 2022 to 2026, proposed to renegotiate the solar energy generation contracts because the state of Honduras simply couldn't afford to pay the high prices that were granted to those companies in the original contracts approved in 2014. In other words, the state of Honduras made a decision to change policies to the benefit of the Honduran people, and the international investors objected. Now, going back to Los Prados project that we've been really focused on today, 9 of those approved contracts that form part of that big mega project, Los Prados project, were granted to drug associates of the president of Congress, Juan Orlando Hernandez. In other words, Juan Orlando Hernandez granted state contracts to his drug trafficking business associates to the benefit of both. But when they were granted, the environmental licenses were given to the 9 individual projects that were small scale and didn't take into account that all 9 of those contracts would be amalgamated or fused into one big large scale mega project that would cause several environmental impacts on surrounding communities. In other words, no proper and legitimate environmental assessment, including the risks and impacts of the project, was conducted. Now, to add to the corruption surrounding the solar energy projects and the organized criminal ties and involvement of the projects that are now owned by Norfund, Scatec, and KLP, Norfund Investments, a really important new report was released in January of this year that was written by the HEY, or the Interdisciplinary Group of International Experts, or GIEI. And I think Aldo is going to put that report on the screen. You can see it there. This was a group of international experts that were formed to investigate the assassination of the well-known indigenous activist Berta Cáceres. Now, this report outlines, amongst a whole bunch of other things, but one of the most important findings of this report connects to the case of Los Prados. The report outlines how the same companies involved in funding the murder of Berta Cáceres, receiving money from the FMO, the development bank, International Development Bank, and how that money was taken by these group of companies and used to fund violence in Rio Blanco, the region that they were proposing to build the hydroelectric dam, and that would also be used to fund Berta Cáceres' murder. The same group of companies are tied to Norfund's investments in the Agua Fria solar energy project in southern Honduras. And a lot of what is mapped out in this new report is information that we haven't had before, or we didn't know before. Now, last year, the 3 Norwegian companies announced a suspension of their 2 claims, their ISDS claims, totaling $400 million against Honduras. We think this is good news, but we fear that the suspension of these ISDS claims came at a cost. And we wonder about the chilling effect of such a large claim against a poor country like Honduras, and whether there were negotiations under the table between the companies and the state to expand the project, despite the ongoing community resistance and the ongoing and 8 years of criminalization of local land defenders. Now, finally, I just want to get into some of the recommendations of the report, which I encourage all to read. There's also an executive summary that is in the link that we've been sharing in the chat. So first and foremost, we are really insistent and recommend the complete cancellation of the Los Prados solar energy project, given the widespread corruption involved in their approval, the link to organized crime, and also the wishes and the opposition of the affected communities that surround that project. Second, we demand that the Norwegian company Scatec, that isn't just involved in a criminalization process, accusing defenders of opposing the project, they actually pay for lawyers to go to all of the legal hearings and to attend all of the legal hearings against the 10 defenders. We demand that they stop criminalizing and persecuting the 10 defenders and that the company and the Norwegian state that have profited from this project pay reparations for the harms that have been caused to the communities, but also to the 10 defenders that have had to participate in this drawn out process. Now, our Honduran partners that are in the room that we've heard from today have made several demands to the Honduran state over many years. And so we also include those as recommendations in a report. So we are requesting an immediate advancement of the Honduran Attorney General's investigation of the 33 complaints that have been filed against Honduran public officials for all the irregularities surrounding the Los Prados project and the acts of corruption, including the involvement of organized crime in those projects. And that Honduras, like all countries in the world, move to exit the ISDS investment protection frameworks because of how damaging they are to countries that want to protect their populations and their environment. And finally, maybe our most important demand, a major demand of the recommendations, our report, is that real efforts be put behind an energy transition in Honduras and globally that is just, that is democratic, and it's based on community and public control of energy generation and administration.
Thanks so much, Karen. Just before we open the floor, and I haven't seen any questions yet in the Q&A, so I just encourage everybody to start to put your questions there or in the chat, and we would be happy to pose them to our guests. But I want to ask a question of all our guests before we do that. And it's given this really significant shift in the political context in Honduras that has taken place in the last 6 months. Well, we've seen the direct and really blatant electoral interference of President Donald Trump in the Honduran general elections, resulting in the inauguration of President Nasuri Asfura at the end of January. And really the sense that this is a setback to the time of the narco-dictatorship in many ways. I'm wondering if we can just hear from some of you a little bit about what this means as land and environment defenders for the potential expansion of the solar parks, and maybe anything else that you think is really important to understand about this change in the context in Honduras that we've recently seen. Don't have a specific order in mind. If anybody wants to just indicate that you'd like to comment. Who'd like to start?
Muchas gracias.
Germán, gracias.
Quisiera iniciar.
Thank you. I would like to start sharing
que los medios corporativos
that the corporations
creado la narrativa
have created this narrative that they're strengthening democracy every 4 years by voting. But that's not democracy, that's just legitimizing a process that they have already arranged. This narrative of democracy that many times we believe has been used to do things that
El
are
presidente
horrible
Astura
for
impuesto, a
Honduran
diferencia de
people.
los Estados Unidos,
Asura president was
eh,
imposed by
se
the
ha,
president of the US.
entre comillas, democráticamente el juicio
This
político
has,
a las distintas
quote
instituciones
unquote,
del
been
país.
a
Se
democratic
suspendió o
justice
se destituyó de su cargo al
for
fiscal general
the
de la
institutions in
República a
the
través del juicio
country.
político.
The
Se destituyó al ahora de
general
los
attorney was
consejeros del
fired.
Consejo Nacional Electoral y sus suplentes.
The
Destituyó a un
advisors
magistrado y
also
sus suplentes
were
del
fired. The
Tribunal
judges,
de Justicia Electoral. De
the
la misma
judge
manera, con
of
esta
elections
metodología, entre comillas, democrática,
was
porque tienen
also
86 votos
let
según
go.
que eso es democracia, pero
And they have
cumple
80
con los
some
estándares
votes, so that makes
y el
them
debido proceso para
democratic.
poder
But
aplicar un juicio político en este sentido.
this
También
does
se
not meet
destituyó la presidenta de la
the
Suprema de
justice
Justicia. Y digo
for
se
this
destituyó porque
democracy.
si bien es cierto hubo una renuncia, pero que al final
And
fue obligada a hacerlo,
even though
porque las consecuencias a través del juicio político serían mucho peores para ella como persona y su familia.
the
En ese
judge, the
sentido,
Supreme
el
Court
Partido
judge left,
Nacional,
this was a
un
pressure.
partido
He was
catalogado
pressured to do
como
this for his safety and his family, so
narco,
this was
que generó
effectively
y
a
ha
firing.
arrastrado en el país en los
This
anteriores 12 años al
establishes like
gobierno de
a
Xiomara Castro,
narco regime.
vuelve al poder y con todos los poderes. Y
This
en
has
ese
come to
sentido, para
power and with
nosotros,
all its
una
powers.
cuestión gravísima, porque
This is
no
very
hay forma de
serious
parar
to
nada en el
us.
Congreso Nacional,
There's no way
puesto
to
que en
stop
esta alianza
anything in
entre el
the
Partido
Congress.
Nacional y Liberal
There
sí
is an
participan
alliance between the
más
liberal
de los 86
and the
votos
National
que la
Party
Constitución
parties,
contempla para
political
aprobar
parties. So that's more than
algunas
86
reformas
votes.
constitucionales
So they can
y
approve all these
sumándose a ello
constitutional
hay
reforms.
3 diputados
There are
del
3
partido
representatives from
Democracia
the
Cristiana y
Democracia
el
Cristiana
partido
Party and
PINE.
the
En ese
PINE
sentido, entonces,
Party.
yo creo que nunca antes habíamos
So
visto
we have
una
never before seen
narcodictadura
a
tan
narco-dictatorship
empoderada como la
as
que tenemos
empowered
ahora
as
y que
now.
eso será muy peligroso
This is
para
very
la población
dangerous
hondureña.
for
Decir
the
que el
population
enfoque
of
del gobierno
Honduras.
de Asfura, igualmente del
Asturias
presidente del Congreso Nacional Tomás
government
Zambrano,
and
es un enfoque de
the
desarrollar a Honduras
president
dándole todas
of the
las
Congress,
facilidades y poderes al poder económico
they
y
want
fortalecer
to
este
give
modelo
all the
económico,
power
que es
to
con el que ellos
the
creen que es la única manera
agents
de
of the
desarrollar a
economic
Honduras,
power,
pero
they believe.
violentando los derechos
And
de las
they think
comunidades,
that's how
sin la
they're going to
participación
develop
ciudadana,
Honduras
sin el consentimiento
without
libre, sin
community
que haya
participation,
este
without
proceso de veeduría a nivel de
freedom
las comunidades
or
para la
public
implementación de estos
hearings
proyectos
from the
extractivos en las
communities
comunidades y
so
que esto
they
lo que
can
generará
conduct all
es
these
más conflictividad,
energy
es más
projects in our
amenazas,
communities.
es
This
más
will continue
desplazamiento de
with
las comunidades, es
continuing
más
this means more
violencia,
displacement,
asesinatos, y lo que
violence,
estamos viviendo en la
killings,
actualidad.
threats to our
Entonces,
communities. We have seen this,
el
we're seeing
panorama no
this
es
in our communities.
nada claro, es un
So
panorama bastante oscuro para las
this
organizaciones
framework is
que
very dark
defendemos derechos en el
for
país. Y yo
our
creo que
organizations
lo más
who are
importante también tiene que
advocating,
ver con
defending
la
rights
articulación
in our
que
countries,
podamos
in our
hacer
country.
entre organizaciones, entre
And we do
comunidades
need to
para
connect
defender los
and
derechos
ally
que se están violentando y que se seguirán
among
violentando.
us
Y a la medida el tiempo pasa,
to defend
vamos
our rights that are being violated.
se va cumpliendo todo, pues
As time passes,
justamente también lo que se ha dicho en los audios que han circulado en los
all
últimos días,
that has
y
been
eso al
said in
final
the
se cumple
audio
así
files
como lo hemos
are
escuchado,
happening
aunque
as
las personas
we
mencionadas lo hayan negado,
heard that
porque la realidad es
even the
totalmente
people
otra.
who were
Gracias.
involved uh, said that they were not accurate. This is happening. Thank you.
If I could add
Thanks so
something.
much, Karen. Yes, go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, Jen. I just wanted to say really quickly that Trump's interference in the Honduran elections has a huge impact on Honduras, and it's hard to understate that. And I think Herman has done a good job at highlighting some of the impacts. But I think that Trump's interference in the elections The US has always interfered in everyone's elections, and Honduras is where I work, so I see that every 4 years. But this was a very different type of intervention. He imposed the president of the country, and it was the Trump interference was about asserting US dominance in Honduras, and in the Latin American region, as he's doing in other parts of the of Latin America. But it's also about US economic interests. And I think that was very clearly demonstrated with one of the very first things that the new president of Honduras did, Nasri Fura, was return to ICID, or the International Arbitration Tribunal that is housed in the World Bank. And that is, the National Party has always promoted the economic interests of the US, of transnational capital, and that is irrespective of whether the National Party is one of the most corrupt parties in the country and is also deeply tied to organized crime and drug trafficking.
Thanks very much, Karen. And just to mention the audios as well that Germán alluded to are the Honduras Gate audios that's how they've been referred to in the international news, that some of you might have seen recently. Would anybody else like to just comment on that question? And if not, we will move on to the next question. So the next question comes from Beati, and I think maybe this would be appropriate for the network of women human rights defense lawyers, and perhaps Don Leonardo y Doña Marlenis, if you could share if you've had any dialogue with Scatec, with Norfund, or with KLP in Honduras about the ongoing criminalization recently, and if you could share a bit about what that's been like, if there has been any dialogue. Samantita,
Pregunta,
quizás.
no sé si me escuchan, sí.
Adelante.
Ok,
I don't know if you can
gracias.
hear me.
En
Thank you.
cuanto a los diálogos
Regarding the
con las empresas,
dialogue with
bueno,
those
justamente
companies,
una de las
we
cuestiones que queremos hacer,
one of the
¿verdad? Es
questions that
justamente
we
por lo que estamos
have
articulando
and
estos
what we're
espacios con
articulating in these
organizaciones
spaces
de los
as
diferentes países a
organizations of
nivel
different
internacional, porque
organizations in
queremos
different
llegar a
countries is because
sostener
we
un
want
diálogo,
to have a
queremos justamente
dialogue.
llegar a la
We
empresa
want
para
to
que
go
sepan en
and
qué se
talk
están
to the
invirtiendo los
companies
fondos, qué es lo que se está
where
haciendo,
are the
cuáles son las
funds are being
consecuencias
invested
gravísimas
in,
que se están ocasionando
what
para las
are
comunidades, para
what
los
kind
líderes y
of
lideresas de
situations
cada
are
una de las
happening with the
comunidades que han
leaders
sido
that have
afectadas
been
por estos proyectos
affected with
fotovoltaicos.
those
En su momento,
projects
en
in the
ocasión
moments.
pasada,
And
se tuvo un
lastly,
acercamiento
we have
con
had
las empresas,
some
pero
talk,
fueron propiciadas
but it
para
was
conciliaciones amañadas,
made to
en
have
donde la empresa lo que
conciliation
pretende
where
es
the company
culpar a
was
las
trying
comunidades,
to fault the
ignorar cuál ha
communities,
sido su
ignore
lucha
the
social y su
communities,
defensa
and ignore
por
the
sus
defense
territorios,
for
por
the
su fuente de
territory,
agua,
for their
ya
water,
que simplemente
because
ofrecen
they just offer, the
desvanecer
companies
lo
just
que son los
offer,
requerimientos
dilute
fiscales
out the
sin tener
fiscal
lo que es
issues
realmente
without focusing
un
really on
reconocimiento por el
the
daño a las comunidades, o
understanding and
reconocer estos
recognizing
gastos,
the
reconocer qué es lo que han estado pasando a nivel
the,
emocional y
the issues that
psicológico,
are having
por lo que no se ha
psychological
tenido
issues,
un
all the
acercamiento
damage that they're
real con
having.
la
So there's
empresa.
not been a real
Realmente los abogados
connection with the
reconocidos en
companies.
materia penal ha sido
In
muy poco.
regard to
Ha
the
sido
lawyers, they
simplemente
haven't offered
quitar el
much. They've
requerimiento
been just
fiscal,
taking the fiscal
pero
requirements,
que
but
que
not.
las comunidades
But
acepten la
the
culpabilidad
communities
de lo
should
que hicieron
accept
por delitos de coacciones y amenazas de los
the
cuales no son
their fault
culpables.
for
De
doing what
hecho,
they
esto
did,
es
and it's
parte
actually
de
not
lo que
true. They're
queremos
not
llegar a la
at fault.
empresa,
So
llegar
that's
a
why we want to
organizaciones de
go
colegas que
and
podamos
talk to
articularnos
them.
en
We want to
conjunto para
articulate
poder
information
expresarle
to
a la empresa qué es lo que
organizations
está
in
pasando en
Norway
Honduras
to
con esos
articulate what's
fondos.
happening with those funds in Honduras.
Thanks very much, Samantha. Um, I'm wondering, just to follow up on that, and just at the moment we don't have any other questions. But I think there was a really rich exchange of And Marlene began by sharing some of the impacts that have been felt in Costa Azul from the installation of the the solar park in that area, of some of the deforestation, about contamination of water supplies, about loss of water supplies that are crucial for production of the agricultural products that the families depend on. I'm just wondering if maybe we can hear from Marlene, if you want to expand, or any of you, a little bit more of what we heard during that meeting last July. There was a lot of exchange about the different impacts of the solar parks on the environment, on the local economy, and this also goes back to some of the false promises of jobs and more energy and more affordable energy. I just wondered if we could take a few minutes to share a little bit more about some of the environmental, social, economic impacts that have been felt from the solar parks in southern Honduras, based on your own experiences, Doña Marlene, Don Leonardo, but also Samantha, Doña Fidelina, Germán, if you want to share anything else that you also hear from community members about some of those real material impacts on people's lives. If anybody would like to start.
Poco más que de los impactos ambientales,
The
donde la empresa
impacts into
instaló
the companies were
144
creating
hectáreas de bosque
144
y
hectares
también
of
ellos
forest,
ahí pasaba
and
las fuentes de agua, que era una fuente
all
de
the
agua
water
que
would
iba a
go through
desembocar a una
there,
playa.
and they would go down
Y
to a
ellos pues
beach.
lo que hicieron
And what
cuando
they
después que les
did
instalaron
when
la montaña, aterraron las fuentes de agua.
they
Ahora
submerged
por
those
eso es
water
que vivimos con,
entrances,
¿cómo se dice? Con
and
la
so
sequedad,
we
porque las
live
aguas pasan de
with
paso para el
the
estero.
water
No
does not
hay,
go through
o sea, la quebrada
our
queda seca
area
porque como
anymore.
ellos
It's
aterraron
dry
todas las
because
fuentes de
everything,
agua.
all the water is
Y es
going
así como
underneath
ahora
the
todas
earth now,
las comunidades, digamos, están sufriendo
and the communities
por
are
mucha
suffering
escasez de agua, porque
because
hasta
there's
como
not
dije,
much
hasta el
water
ganado se está
coming.
muriendo de sed, de
The
hambre, porque no hay
cows are
pasto, no hay agua.
hungry, there's no
Y en los
water, they're
cultivos,
just
pues
dying
es
because
lo
there's no
mismo, porque si
water.
no hay agua,
And
los cultivos no producen.
all the things
Es
that we
una zona
produce,
que
our
antes
vegetables
era
and
bien
our food,
productiva,
that
como
before it was
digamos,
very
antes sembraban
productive.
arroz,
There was rice,
frijoles, maíz, y otros
beans,
sembraban,
corn.
tenían cooperativas
Others
de
were
melones, de sandía, todo eso
producing
era una tierra
melons,
productiva.
watermelons. It was a
Más sin
productive
embargo,
part
hoy
of this earth was
no
productive,
producimos
and now we do not
esos
produce that
productos. Ya
anymore.
más bien si los queremos
Now,
comer es
if we
comprado.
need
Y antes pues
to eat it,
no los
we have to
comprábamos
buy
porque
it.
los
Before
papás
we
los
used
sembraban.
to make it, our
Y ahí
parents used to
nosotros teníamos
grow it
como una
in our
fuente de
own
trabajo
homes.
también, porque
And
nosotros
it was
también
a job
ayudábamos a
also because we
cultivar.
were
Y
helping
ahora ya no es lo mismo
to
porque
farm
la
this,
verdad que
and
si
now
siembran
it's not the
no
same.
sacan la producción que ellos
If you
esperan,
start
como
trying
dice, a veces es más
to
el gasto que
produce
invierten que lo
this
que
fruit
sacan.
or
Eh,
this
y
food,
es así pues
it just doesn't work, and it's
donde los ha
expensive, and
estado
it just doesn't
afectando
grow.
demasiado
It's hard,
por no
and it's
cuidarnos los
affecting,
bienes comunes. Y es
it's our
importante cuidar
common
nuestros bienes comunes y
our
conocer
common
nuestros derechos.
knowledge, and
Es como
our
una
we have to
generación
understand what's our
decir
right,
que
and
nosotros
we need to
cuidamos
know that
para
we
que
take
nuestros
care
hijos o
of
nietos
our future, so
ellos
our
sigan
grandchildren, they
ese
can
contexto de
follow this
cuidar,
context of
defender
taking
también ellos.
care and
Es así como
defend.
nosotros les estamos enseñando,
And we're trying to teach them
pues
also how to
decirles que
act
la verdad que sí ha
and
afectado ese parque,
tell them
porque
the
la
truth
verdad
that
que
it
la
is
comunidad de Costa
impacting
Azul
us.
sí la
These
tenemos
parks
muy
in Costa
cerquita,
Azul
digamos
is
cerca,
so
cerca,
close to us,
y
very, very close
nosotros
to us. And
resplandores que dan esos
and
paneles solares nos afectan bastante porque están
solar
cerca de la
panels
casa, las
are very
calores ya no
so
las
close.
aguantamos
We are
nosotros.
super hot
A
because it just
veces de
hits
la misma
our
calor
housing.
está saliendo de eso como sarpullido, le dicen
We
nosotros,
even
que
have
pica el
some
cuerpo
kind
a
of
uno,
itchiness in our
y
skin
son
because
como
of
una alergia, digamos, y es de eso, de
hard
esa tunilla que
heat.
vuelan esos parques, porque si vuelan una tunilla,
And
ahorita en el verano,
in
ya en el
summer
invierno es que ellos,
and in
digamos,
winter,
contaminan mucho el medio
it
ambiente también ellos,
contaminates a
porque
lot.
ellos
when they wash those panels, all that liquid, all that dirt is going into the water. And now, even though they go directly to the beach. So it's the shrimp is contaminated also. And even, sometimes they die before the fish die, and they're just contaminating everything that's happening with the contamination from these companies is just dreadful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Would anybody else like to comment on the impacts of the solar parks? If not, I just have one more question, and one of the other important issues that we underscore in the report comes back to the investor-state dispute settlement claims of these transnational investors. That while the community complaints for fraud, for corruption do not proceed, corporations still have over $1 billion of claims against Honduras for having tried to just renegotiate the sort of most excessive incentives found in those contracts. And we worry also that may have been used to negotiate the expansion of the Los Prados project. And I'm just wondering if some of you might be able to share your reactions when you learned that Norfund and KLP and Scatec brought their $400 million in suits against Honduras. And just in general, any other concerns that you might have about the possible expansion of the Los Prados project in the current context. And I see that there's a hand raised in the room. So whoever wants to speak, please go ahead.
Quería hablar un poco, ampliar
I
lo que
wanted to talk
sobre las
about the
contaminaciones
contamination, about the solar panels.
Es decir, cuando estas empresas
When
lavan
these
esos
companies
paneles solares,
wash those
va a
panels,
través, pero
all that
el pescado
solutions
y
is
el
going
camarón
into
se
the
muere.
to
Por
the
ejemplo, el año
rivers and to
pasado,
the ocean. All the
en
shrimp,
lugar
all
que le
the
dicen la
fish
verderilla,
die.
blanqueada
Last
del
year,
pescado donde se
it
murió
was,
cuando cayeron las
finding
primeras
all
lluvias.
this death of
Arrastra
fishes.
esa
It
contaminación
moves,
y va a la
and
odestera.
all that
¿Qué significa?
all
Que
that liquids are
los
going to
pobladores que vivimos en
to
esos
the
lugares
areas where we
ya no
have this
tenemos
food.
acceso
So we don't have
a esas
access
playas
to
porque el
that
pescado se
beach
muere, el
because
camarón se
all
muere
those fish and
y,
all those shrimp
y
die,
aparte que ya son pocas
and
las
there's not
extensiones que quedan para que el
much
pueblo pueda
other
ir a
places
la
where the
pesca
people
porque las
can
camaroneras
go to fish
tienen
because there's shrimp
concesionadas todas las playas
organizations or the
y
shrimp
las han
places,
acaparado
the shrimp
de una
organizations
manera
have
que
taken over also the
no hay
beaches.
acceso.
And so there's no
Aparte que
access
las
to be
mismas
able to fish
camaroneras
for
tiran
us.
un químico porque ellos
And they
prefieren el
also
camarón.
throw a chemical
Cuando
because
se
they
les mete el
prefer
agua
the
como
shrimp.
pescado, entonces tiran un químico y
So they
matan
throw
todo
some
eso.
liquid.
Y eso
And,
significa que ya el estero ya
and
no produce
so
pescado,
the water doesn't
porque produce el
produce
camarón que ellos
water,
quieren, porque
shrimp.
ellos
They only produce what
producen
they
camarón de
want,
calidad,
the
no producen
quality shrimp.
camarón
They don't produce shrimp,
barato, ¿no? Porque hay
cheap shrimp.
variedades de camarón.
There are different
Entonces,
types of
esa es
shrimp.
la situación que
And
se vive
so
en esas comunidades
our situation is that we're not being able
estos
to fish
proyectos.
or
Por
catch
un lado,
shrimp anymore.
vecinos de
Our
las camaroneras,
communities
por
are
otro lado,
being
las
harmed by the
fotovoltaicas,
the
por el otro lado están
shrimperies,
las cañeras.
by the
De,
cleaning of the solar panels.
Decía doña Fidelina,
Doña
ponen unas grandes
Fidelina,
cantidades de pozos
there's
donde se
all
llevan
these
toda el agua para
wells where
estar
all the
regando
water
caños
is
y nosotros los
funneled
que
to,
luchamos por un
and we
poquito de
are
agua quedamos
fighting
sin
for
nada
a little bit of water. We don't get any
porque
water.
esos proyectos ocupan
And those
cantidades de agua.
projects, take
Entonces,
a lot of water.
realmente el campesino, el
And the
trabajador,
people who are
nos miramos
working, the people who are living in these communities
querer producir un poco. Yo soy una de las
want some
personas
water.
que
I'm one of the
trabajo
people
en la
that
agricultura.
work in
Me gusta sembrar
agriculture.
el maíz,
I
los
like to
frijoles
produce
y tengo
corn.
una pequeña cría de ganado.
I have a
Pero
little
ahorita
bit
mismo
of
están muriendo
animals or
por
cows
falta
which
de
are dying
pasto y agua
because
porque
there's no
el invierno
grass and no
ha sido tan
water.
seco que hasta
The
ha
winter has been so
casi no tenemos
dry
agua en nuestra
that we haven't gotten water in our community since May 26th. And usually in the years before, we used to have, at the beginning of May, we would have water. So this is the situation. And with the deforestation, because of the solar panels, there's just no more trees either. That way, where they create these projects, we are in the communities that are living around there. We're just not we're just surviving, and we are unable to produce what we need to survive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don Leonardo. I think understanding the severity of the impacts, especially for subsistence agriculture and in your communities in southern Honduras, is crucial. And you also touch on some really important aspects as well about the possible cumulative impacts between what's happening with the solar parks and the other extractive activities that have been expanding in the south of Honduras and that were not at all considered or haven't been looked at in any detail. And also the impacts of climate change on top of it all, already having extraordinarily high temperatures in southern Honduras, regularly hitting 39, 40 degrees. These severe stretches of drought and lack of water, for which is called the dry corridor. I mean, there's just a whole combination of things going on that make this a very serious situation. And your comments really help to, I think, bring that home. So thank you very much. I just want to close, I think, reiterating some of Samantha's comments as well about really one of the intentions of sharing this report, about holding this webinar today and the one we held yesterday, is about making some connections. We are really eager to make connections, especially with organizations in Norway that can help to build a bridge for more concerted and direct dialogue with Scatec, Norfund, and KLP Norfund investments. And to really put pressure on them to stop this criminalization. 8 years of criminalization has horrendous ramifications and never should have been started in the first place. But 8 years later it really is both the psychological, the social, the economic impacts on the families involved is really severe, in addition to all of the underlying problems with the project and the impacts that it's been having. So I just want to wind up and reiterate deep thanks to everybody who's joined us today, to everybody who's been sharing with us from their experience and research. And to Aldo and Netfa, who have been helping us with the technical support, and to Mara and Karen for the important interpretation. A big thanks to you all. We will be following up with a recording of the webinar and providing these links by email as well. And really hope to have the opportunity to reach out again to some of you about possible actions that we can develop and coordinate together following on from this launch. So thank you very much and have a great rest of the day.